I asked the officer, I said, how bad is it? And he says, Ginger, it's bad. You need to get your children here.
Ginger Sanders is a former chaplain with the Billy Graham Rapid Response Team. She's used to sharing the hope of Jesus with people in crisis. But when her husband was in a motorcycle accident, Ginger was the one in crisis.
But I cannot explain it. There was a peace. I cannot explain the peace that I had.
Times like these, it's hard to see, but somehow I have a peace. You're near.
Ginger Sanders is our guest on this episode of GPS, God, People, Stories. I'm Jim Kirkland.
And I'm Phil Fleischman. Ginger's not only going to talk about God carrying her through a crisis, she's also going to share how she has seen God do the same thing for other hurting people.
And that's something Billy Graham's going to talk about too.
Christ is with you in that hour of crisis and that hour of trouble.
You'll hear more of Billy Graham's teaching a little later in this episode of GPS. And you can always, including right now, learn about beginning a relationship with Jesus Christ at this website, findpeacewithgod.net. That's findpeacewithgod.net.
GPS. God, People, Stories.
Denny had been working in law enforcement for 32 years, and I was in the banking field, and I also taught at the police academy.
Then, Denny and Ginger Sanders retired, beginning in 2007.
And in April of that year, I am looking on the billygraham.org website, doing a devotion with them, following through, and one morning I opened it up, and right across the front of the website it says, chaplains needed for our rapid response team with law enforcement experience.
The Billy Graham Rapid Response Team is made up of volunteer chaplains all across the U.S. and in several other countries. Ginger and Denny live in Alabama.
And I go, hey, would you be interested in being a Billy Graham Rapid Response chaplain and let's doing that? And he said, why, sure, that sounds fine.
So they went through the application process and the training, and they started out thinking they'd be deployed maybe once or twice a year.
Then, lo and behold, in 2011, we were home, I think, 12 weeks out of the whole year. But we say God has a sense of humor, but we can see him everywhere. As we look back in our life, we can see how he opened doors and closed doors and just made it a blessing for us to be part of this ministry and to be part of serving him out in the community. In the middle of disaster, God is there.
That's the mission of the Rapid Response Team, to share Jesus in the midst of tragedy. It was formed in the days immediately following 9/11, and since then, the ministry has responded to more than 250 disasters. Ginger remembers her and Denny's first deployment.
We got a call, and in 20 minutes, we needed to be on the road. Iowa had flooded, and they also had had a tornado. And so everything that they had cleaned up from got wiped away by the other.
As they were ministering to survivors of the flood and tornado, Ginger and another female chaplain met a man who worked for social services.
He gave us his business card, and he said, here's my business card. If you ever need anything while you're in town, be sure to call me. And then said, but wait, can I ask a favor? And we said, sure, what's that? And he said, let me write a name on the back of this card for your team to pray for. He said, this is a lady that works with me, and she's not a Christian, and I have been praying for her for months.
And of course, they agreed. Now, jumping to Denny's part in this story, he and another male chaplain went to a rehab center to visit an elderly gentleman who'd been hurt in the storm. As they were leaving the building, a woman walking in saw their Billy Graham Rapid Response Team shirts, and she thanked them for all they were doing.
And they said, well, how are you holding up? Did you have any damage? And they said tears started coming to her eyes, and she sat down on the sofa there in the lobby of that nursing home or rehab center. She sat down and she said, I am just broken. And they started talking to her, and she said, I know I can't survive like this. So they talked to her for a little bit and shared the gospel, shared some scriptures with her. And she said, well, how can I have peace and assurance? And they said, well, only Jesus can give you that peace and assurance that you need. She said, well, that's what I want. How can I find him? And so they led her to the cross, and she prayed to receive Jesus Christ.
You are the one Messiah. You are I am. You are I am.
Before they all parted ways, the woman gave Denny and the other chaplain her business card. just in case she could help them in any way. That evening, all the chaplains got together for their daily debrief. Denny told about the woman that gave him the card. That reminded Ginger that she'd also gotten a business card.
We put the cards out, and they were identical business cards. Identical business card. The only difference is the name on the lady's card was the same name written on the back of the man's card. That was his co-worker.
He'd been praying that his co-worker would give her life to Jesus, and God used Ginger and Denny Sanders to help answer that prayer.
Another time God used the Sanders in that way was in 2012, following the mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Ginger and Denny were among a group of Rapid Response Team chaplains ministering to the community there.
As we go out had been out in the memorial areas outside praying and letting people cry on our shoulders. It was about 9 o'clock that night. Well, we go over, and just down the strip mall, there was a donut place. And I said, I would just like a warm cup of coffee and a bagel or something.
After Ginger and Denny got settled at their table, they struck up a conversation with a table of 20-somethings. Ginger and Denny asked them if they knew any of the shooting victims.
They knew of them, or they knew the children, but not closely. They said, but what's really bothering us is our buddy that used to sit in this empty chair here was killed 2 weeks ago by a freak accident. He was on the sidewalk and a truck had hit him. And my husband said, well, you know, all of us are going to die one day. And they said, yeah, but what can we do about that?
So Ginger and Denny explained how you can live forever in heaven with God by having a personal relationship with Jesus. Then, out of respect for the restaurant, the chaplains offered to meet at their van with anyone who wanted to talk more.
We walked out, and I started stepped off the curb, actually, and my husband looked back, and he said, wait a minute. There's one young man. Nope, there's two young men getting up. No, wait, there's three. He said, the whole table's getting up. And there was 8 people came out. We had a captive audience there on that sidewalk. I mean, God was all over that place.
Eventually, Ginger and Denny invited everyone to pray silently with them and consider surrendering their lives to Jesus.
I'm just reliving this as I'm sharing it. We said, with your head still bowed, if any of you prayed that prayer for the first time in your life, would you just raise your hand so that we can pray for you? 1 hand went up, 2 hands went up, all of their hands went up. And we just praised God right there.
Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy.
Less than a year later, Ginger's faith would be tested when Denny was in a terrible motorcycle accident.
He had hit his head, cracked his helmet, his face had hit the speedometer, his nose was broke, his lip was cut off. It was all head injuries.
But Ginger didn't know all those specifics when she first got word of Denny's accident from the local police.
But I knew something bad. And I asked the officer, I said, how bad is it? And he says, Ginger, it's bad. You need to get your children here.
Denny had been taken by helicopter to the hospital.
Well, the first thing I did was call our church. Then I called the Billy Graham team to start the prayers. Then I started calling the children. And I noticed I was holding my phone and my hand was shaking. But I cannot explain it. There was a peace. I cannot explain the peace that I had. There was fear.